So I may keep going. I have a few more slides and I wanted to share with you some specific activities to close up here in the last half hour. So I will reshare my screen. And let's see, actually, a second, move things around. All right. So let me know if you're not seeing the slides again, but I think that you are. So I'm going to just give you a few example activities and I'll quickly describe what these are. And part of the reason I was asked to do this presentation today, this webinar, is that another time that I taught this environmental education class, another project that we did was with the Snow Leopard Trust. And what we did is we had a pretty big class that time, about 50 students. And at the end of our semester, we used what we had learned throughout the semester to develop some ideas of activities that might be used in teaching about snow leopards. And I will say, and for those of you who maybe are working on other issues not related to snow leopards, most of these activities could easily be applied to other contexts. So they're designed for snow leopard context in the countries where the Snow Leopard Trust works, but you could easily substitute that, and hopefully it will become clear how that would be. You could easily substitute other topics, other focal species, other focal areas to apply these to other places. And so I'm going to talk about 3 of them that the Snow Leopard Trust staff, said were particularly interesting. But these will all be posted. So within the next couple of months, they're all going to be posted on the Snow Leopard Trust website. Really excited to have that repository up there as just a place to look for some ideas of environmental ed activities. And importantly, we described them pretty specifically. I had the students, we worked to make them pretty clear, the steps of what you would do to move forward in these activities. But the idea is that they're fodder for you to create with, so that you don't have to follow exactly what the ideas that we have. There are some ideas of different things you could try, and and especially one of them, it'll be clear you can modify. You can take pieces of these, you could combine them in different ways. You can modify them to fit your context or your needs. So the first one that I'm going to describe, there are a lot of different versions of this kind of thing. So here's one example of a nature walk and journaling. So what this involves is students walking in a natural area, whatever that means in this context, in your context, while observing how humans have altered the landscape around them. And they will reflect on the moral and ethical implications behind these alterations using a couple of different lenses. So using religious and cultural lenses. So core here, they go on a walk. Observation is key. So they're being mindful. They're looking at what's around them, and particularly they're looking at human impact on the land. And then they're thinking about what those impacts mean, specifically using religious and cultural lenses. So here's what the prompts that we came up with. Prompts for students to consider while they're walking. What does it look like around you? What do you see, hear, and smell? So connecting to your senses is really big, being present. Write about any plants and animals you see. So just notice what's around you and either draw them, write words about them. And then think about that human impact. Have humans been here? Often, how can you tell that humans have been here? How much have humans changed this place? Do you think they've altered the landscape too heavily? So this gets into asking students to reflect and to give an opinion. So do you think that this is too heavy of an alteration? Why or why not? What does that mean? So just start thinking about, what am I seeing? Is this good or bad? Do I need to call it good or bad? Is it too heavy? What does that mean? And then getting into this religious and cultural component. So this was designed for Islamic countries. So what is Islam? But again, you could replace this with any relevant religion or cultural context. What does Islam say about humans' relationship to the earth? What do your parents, friends, and peers think about our relationship to the earth? What do you think? So this is a really reflective piece that's asking people, okay, now take a step back and think about what your religion, a religion, says about humans' relationship to the earth, and then what do the people around you? So that's the sort of cultural piece, looking at the formal religious source, and then the sort of cultural piece of what do you, and then asking them to reflect on their own interpretation. What do you think? And then specifically, one idea here was that the students could take the Quran with them when they went on this walk. So this question of where does that religious text talk about nature, and potentially even getting specific. So having the book with them, looking at where the Quran talks about nature, what it says, citing specific instances could be. Yeah. Okay, so, and it's good to know that you do some of these walks. So there's lots of ways, I'm looking at Flavia's comment. Yeah, lots of ways you can do these walks. You know, there's lots of versions of nature walks. This one, what it's focusing on is asking people to look at to look at and identify human impact, which is a little different than just observing the natural things around you. And then reflecting on, what does that mean? So this is getting at the sort of getting people involved in how important is that human impact? Is it too much? Is it too little? And then connecting that to culture. So thinking about, and this relates to some points that you all made earlier, that it's really important to think about the cultural context that you're found in. So this helps them do that. It helps students go there and not think about these things as separate, not think about nature as totally separate than humans. This activity is really about integrating and looking at that integration and interdependence. So it's hitting on a number of the things that we've talked about. And what it does, some of the goals, it builds or contributes to knowledge. So it contributes to knowledge about connections between religion and nature and the human role in environment systems. So again, it's that interdependence. It's getting people to think, the students to think about interdependence and integration. Skills that it builds, observation, so careful, mindful observation, the analysis of the human role, so analyzing, right? So this idea of analyzing, what role do humans have in this place? And then critical thinking. So this critical thinking is a really big in all education. That's one of the main things we aim for is to encourage critical thinking. And so good environmental education activities give students a chance to do that. Right? They give students a chance to go a little bit deeper and not just be repeating facts or spouting out facts, but to really dig in and think, oh, how is this complicated issue playing out? And what's my role in this complicated issue? And how do these different things come into tension? All of those kinds of aspects of critical thinking. And then the attitudes piece, it's asking students to consider their own attitudes and those of friends and family. So it's very directly asking students to say, what do you think? So think about what your religion says, what your friends and family say. What do you think? And so it's also asking students to reflect on, do I think the same thing as people around me or not? How do I go there? Okay, so this is one potential activity, again, that you could take pieces of, modify, etc. The second activity that I will talk about is called Dinner Time for Animals in Mongolia. Again, you could do this in really any place once you see the activity, but it was designed for application in Mongolia specifically. So the idea is that students will draw the species, plants and or animals that make up the diet of various animals. And they draw this on a paper plate. So ideally you have a paper plate that they can draw on, sort of a metaphor of, humans eat on plates, animals not so much. But point is to learn about the variety of foods that make up animal diets. Then importantly, compare those animal diets to their own diet. So it's this of doing a few things. It's making this connection between humans and other species that everybody eats. And so let me think about what some other species are eating, and then let me think about what I'm eating, and making that connection to the systems that surround us and the fact that we're also animals. We also have to eat. How does that compare, and creates this sort of kinship and again, that interdependence or that similarity, that shared experience with non-human animals. And so here's an example of what this might look like. So you have this paper plate, and this is, for instance, could be provided an example, but the students would be drawing the animals. So this is a snow leopard's plate. So what is a snow leopard going to be eating, right? So the idea here is students get a chance to learn what other animals are eating. They get a chance to draw these other animals, and then they might have different plates for different animals. You could compare whether you have different students do different animals in the class. That's one way of doing this, or have one student do this for multiple different animals. But what you have then is an idea of the different things that different things that animals are eating. And so this gets a little bit at this point Vina was making. It's a little bit like the web of life activity, but it gets at this, this complexity, this overlap, right? So it's not one-to-one. It'll show that there's a lot of overlap between the different plates. When you have a lot of different plates out, you'll see that there's a lot of repetition, and it also very clearly makes the point about death. This is sort of a gruesome point. And then the other point, so sorry, I want to do this first. That's what I want to do. This point of drawing their own, a really important part of this exercise is then drawing their own plate and thinking about, so there's more details in the write-up of this that I won't get into, but there are details on the prompts that you can give students when they look at their own plate and they think about their own plate and where that food is coming from. So there's sort of getting into a food systems piece, looking at this idea of what we eat is one of the biggest impacts on the environment. And you can use this as an entree into that kind of environmental education, that our food and our sources of food, one of the biggest ways we impact the environment, and so just being conscious of that, being aware of it and thinking about it. Thanks, Iftikhar, that comment. And then what this contributes to, a couple different things. So it's local species. So what species around them are consuming, how they're connected. And then what I was just talking about. So human interactions with nature via noting their own diet. So making that connection with their own impact on the environment and how they're interacting with the environment via their diet. Then again, critical thinking as before. So thinking about food, energy cycles, and relationships between creatures on the landscape. So this is where if you have multiple plates, you have multiple students, you could do some activities looking at overlaps. Where do you see similar things? Where do you see conflicts, that kind of thing. So this is very physical too. So you could do something where you're moving them around, having students think about what's going on in an ecosystem, right? It's a way of thinking about an ecosystem that's just a little bit different. And then the attitudes piece, I really like this one, that considering the relationships between themselves and animals and feelings of kinship or connection. So this idea of connect, like, oh, we're all eating. I'm just like an animal in terms of I have a plate too, and it's composed of these different things and they come from different places. And so I think there's a subtle sense of shared experience that could be really powerful here. Okay, and the last example I will give is what we call the 5 senses. 5 senses ask students to think about their 5 senses and how humans are adapted to our lifestyles. Then connect this information to the adaptations and lifestyles of snow leopards, or you could say another species you wanted to focus on. So goals include learning about the characteristics of snow leopards or whatever species, and introducing the concept of ecological adaptations. So this idea of evolution, adaptation, et cetera, introducing that idea, that ecological idea, and then also connecting to greater ecosystem dynamics. So similar to the food activity I just shared, like this idea of going from a very embodied experience of sensation and how we operate as humans and how other animals operate in the world, going from that to thinking about ecosystems and how ecosystems operate and how those very embodied experiences sort of scale up to ecosystem levels. So what does this look like? So first you have students examine their own senses and brainstorm. So this again is bringing them into mindfulness, having them notice, what do they feel? What do they see? What do they smell? How does that work? How good is their sense of smell? How good is their sense of sight? How sensitive is their sense of touch? Just asking them to notice what they as biological organisms are able to perceive and what's easy for them, harder for them to perceive, that kind of thing. So asking students to really think about that and observe and notice their own experience. And then think about how so there's a little bit something missing here in the diagram. Think about how that relates to their lives and what they need those senses for. And so what we're adapted to. And then think about, I'm going to put the intent to the description here because I think it's more clear. So they think about their own experience and how that relates to their own adaptation. Then they start thinking about the animal senses. So the snow leopard senses. So how do snow leopard senses help snow leopards? So given what they know about this animal, what is strong, what is weak, what are snow leopards able to perceive that maybe we're not able to perceive, et cetera? How do those help snow leopards? And then instructors would provide a brief lesson on adaptation and niches. So this idea of adaptation to particular situations, the idea of different animals having different adaptations to operate in their ecological niche. So a short lesson with that basic idea of we are adapted, all animals, including humans, are adapted to do different things. So that would be number 3, that lesson. Students would then diagram. So this is sort of a more interactive piece you can give students. And there's an example in the write-up here of a sort of outline of a snow leopard, where students could diagram the different aspects of the snow leopard and what are the senses, what are the characteristics of the snow leopard and the senses, physical traits and senses, and how those traits are adaptive to the snow leopard's habitat and lifestyle. Number 5, this is another bit so that I'm very big on this empathy piece. This is one thing I really emphasize in the class, so you can see this coming out in these activities. So students discuss what might happen if they switched places with a snow leopard for a day. So again, it's just an interesting way to have students think about what it's like to be another being. What would it be like if I were a snow leopard? And then getting at this idea of adaptation, learning that ecological concept. So given what they were noticing about their own physical traits, what if they switched places with a snow leopard? And what would that mean? How would they do? And then one thing you could do, so this is where this activity is getting very long. There's a lot involved here, but the 6th one, another activity, you could talk about climate change and this idea of adaptation and climate change. So this big idea that some environments are changing more quickly than species can adapt to them. It's a big idea in climate change. So you could discuss this, share that. What does that mean? Maybe apply it to the case of snow leopards or whatever species you're focusing on. And students could reflect on what that might mean. Great. And then what this is trying to do, it contributes to knowledge. So this one's really big on ecology. This is really teaching a lot of ecology, specific concepts there. And then potentially, if you do that last part, climate change and impacts. And then skills, it deals with problem solving and applying concepts to new situations. So it's asking students to take a concept they learned as they're applying it to their own lives and transfer it to a new situation, which is a really good mental skill. And then attitudes to this idea of empathy with snow leopards, sense of kinship, and thinking about just caring about these other species. Okay, so those, yeah, interesting. I'm seeing your comment, Zami, about students made to link their religion with environmental education. Yeah, that's something that you know, this is in many cases a really important part of people's lives is their religion. And so with that, that goes along with this idea of environmental education being life-wide, being integrated into people's lives. Like if that's something that's important in the place where you're working, linking into that and making that connection, especially since there are aspects of many religions that talk about environmental stewardship, so linking that up, and that might help make environmental education more relevant. It might help bring it into other aspects of people's lives. Great. Okay. So as I said, oh, sorry, one more point before that. So interesting that this is a shortcoming of a lot of the work that we did in that class, that these activities are light on the action. It would be good to brainstorm how we might add action components to them. So we don't have a ton of time left, so we probably won't do that. But I think I recognize that a lot of the activities that we have posted don't go as far on the action as they could. And especially given the points that you raised about the difficulty, self-efficacy, and people feeling like they can make a difference, I think it's really important to add action elements to these components. So to think up to these activities, so to think about when you're doing EE, how can you give students a project or something that they can do in their community, even if it's very, very small. I think it's less important that an action is large than that it is something concrete that students can dedicate to themselves to. So I think I just want to recognize that shortcoming of the ideas we provided and encourage you to really think about that aspect of environment, that is one part of environmental education. So again, not just information delivery, but allowing students to do something, not only so they learn better, but so they learn content better and knowledge better, but so they learn skills and empowerment to be able to take action. Great, interesting. Iftikhar, important to link religion, culture, and EE. Yeah, great in your study area. So I wonder if you could think about, linking this action piece with religion. Is there some way to link taking action with religion? And then I will just wanted to end with these and many more activities will soon be posted on the Snow Leopard Trust website. So I think we will let you know when they're up, but hopefully this again provides some idea fodder to be creative and really encourage you to expand and to invent things using these ideas as seeds, and to move on from them, and also to think particularly about how to add action components. Great. Okay, I had one last question. I was interested, this is the last slide that I have, or the last question for you. I thought it could be interesting to discuss the biggest barriers you face to implementing EE like we've discussed. So if there's anything about what I've just discussed that like this might be challenging to do some of the things we've talked about, I'd love to hear about that. So this is one thing I'd love to hear, but I also, in the last few minutes that we have, I also would be totally happy to have questions or comments or anything else that you want to share, voice, anything from some of the other facilitators or presenters. If there's anything that links to what you're going to talk about later, that would be great to put into people's minds. So we just have a few minutes here to talk about anything anyone wants to address. And if there aren't things like that, I guess I'd love to hear, okay, what might be hard about these activities? What might be challenging about some of the details of the activities that I've presented? I'm seeing Iftikhar, priority and understanding reality. I'm not sure I know what you mean.
Yeah, sorry to interrupt you. I think these are one of the main barriers that I assume during environmental education, because the people have different priorities in their life, and to make them understand the reality and the issues that we are facing, and the current ongoing environmental issues, and their priority in their life, especially for religion, culture, and we have to uplift the priority for environmental education. That's what I think, and that's what I have observed as a barrier. As per my experience, I was just talking about the barriers. Sorry.
Yeah, great. That's perfect. Really helpful, and I think that again, you hit on something that again we talk about all the time in environmental education, is that people have a lot going on. Life is complicated, and people have to worry about feeding their families and having places to stay, and this religion point that you brought up, that may just be more important. And so
yeah, I'll just give you an example. Like when I go to study, I'm studying human wild carnivore conflict, human snow leopard, and there's human brown bear, and there's human wolf conflicts in the region where I'm studying. So whenever I go for interview and I go for like understanding their emotions and all that, they say like, why would we leave the snow leopard, a carnivore that is attacking our livestock again and again? Why should they? So it's very quite like they have prioritized their livestock like above the endangered species that's we have been challenged to like conserve. So in order to do that, and like obviously there are like other recommendations like compensation plan schemes and all that, and insurance plans and all that, but sometimes like this doesn't comes into play. So this what I meant to say was this is what I meant to say, because like for the priority and understanding reality, so they have prioritized their personal benefits and all that, not looking at the larger picture. So this was quite of a barrier for me as per my experiences in the field. That's why I just realized to show up take up this point.
Yes, well, huge. And I think super relevant to the snow leopard situation. And we talked about this in the activities that we developed, talking with Ranjani and Justine about this being a huge issue, right? And if that's an issue of priority, if you need your livestock are your livelihood, that is your priority. Right? And so how do you balance this this caring for, or not killing, in the case of the snow leopard, this animal? I certainly don't have an easy answer. I think this idea of the environmental education is looking at interconnections, trying to talk about why this might matter. So there's sort of ecological reasons it might matter. I think your point about the importance of religion, I wonder. I mean, I don't know. I don't know enough about about Islam or the other religions that are predominant in those areas, but is there a way to talk about the sort of moral issues, right? So I think it's interesting you mentioned a lot of the tools that we have that are being implemented are these payment schemes, right? Like we're going to compensate financially for something, but it's interesting to think about the different ways you might approach this problem. And there's a sort of financial compensation, and then you also could think about the moral or ethical issues at play. And I don't know, but it's interesting to think about how those relate to each other and sort of engage students in that question and just have them. I think that's part of environmental education, is have people think about it, just raising those questions.
Yeah, thank you so much for that.
Yeah, thank you. And I think, so Almagul, you made a really important point about the teachers being overloaded with work, that they have everyday teaching work and lack of time and motivation. My partner is a teacher. It is a really, really, really hard job. He teaches 6th grade science, and it is exhausting, right? So this idea of having to add things to your plate. So I think one thing that we can do there is this idea of integrating this throughout the curriculum. Is this shouldn't be an added thing, right? That's the way you could try to phrase it. It's not added. This is a way it's a lens you can use to approach everything that you're doing. So these activities, they teach science, they meet goals that teachers need to meet anyway. So that's something you can work on, is like this, let's try to make this not an added thing, but something to support. Okay, I'm going to take work away from you because I'm going to give you an activity you can do, right? I'm going to support you by giving you a prepared activity that will help you instead of add work. So that's one reframing that you could potentially do. Okay. Great. Yeah. And lack of time in the school curriculum for EE. So same response there, is like, is there a way to integrate this with requirements? And that's something that's happening a lot in the United States, is that in environmental education, it relates to all these different science requirements, to social science requirements, to history requirements. Like, how can you bring it in? Okay, it is 10 o'clock and I'm really excited to see all the conversation, but I want to make sure we're on time. So thank you so much. I think it's been really wonderful to hear from so many of you and hear your ideas. And I hope that this has been helpful. I will provide the slides to the Snow Leopard Trust. And yeah, thank you so much for being here. I don't know if Ranjani and Justine, you want to close things up?
Thanks so much, Rochelle. That was a really, really interesting session. And I think we all learned quite a lot. And thanks to all our participants for joining us and, for engaging in such a, like Flavia says, it was a very rich discussion. So thank you so much. And we're really excited because we have a lot of 3 more very exciting sessions coming up. And the next session is going to be led by the Land of the Snow Leopard. And it's going to build on what Rochelle has already covered, because she's been covering some of the basics and some of the theory of environmental education. And the Land of the Snow Leopard is going to build on that. And here we talk about indigenous learning and how can we incorporate that into, our programs. And it again links back to the concept of place and culture that Rochelle covered. And after that, we have Vena and Roshni from nature classrooms, and they're going to be covering the point that Rochelle kept coming back to about how can we integrate all of this into everyday practice, into the classrooms, so that it doesn't feel like it's a massive burden on the teachers. So both Roshni and Vena are going to be covering that in quite a lot of detail. And in the last session, both Roshni and Vena are going to walk us through developing some of our own, modules that we can probably use in our landscape. So it's the last one is more of a workshop, Vena. Sorry. Yeah, Vena's name is Vena. Even I and I've known Vena for years now. Sometimes I call it Vena.
That's completely okay. I'm very, very used to it, so it's fine.
Even I keep, So Vena Kapoor. So thank you so much, everyone, and huge thank you to the facilitators. And looking forward to seeing you all in the next sessions.
Yeah,
Thanks,
thank you all so
Rachel.
much for your awesome participation, and I'm really excited for the ensuing sessions. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks,
Thank you
Ash.
so much.
Bye. Nice.